Some movies need scale. These movies need a room. The best single-location films do not feel small. They feel inescapable. A coffin, bunker, bathroom, bedroom, dispatch center, jury room. Once the door closes, the real story begins, and every new choice makes the walls feel a little closer. That is the magic trick of the subgenre. Remove geography, and you get pure pressure. Remove escape routes, and you get character under stress. Remove spectacle, and suddenly a room can feel like the end of the world. This is Picture Recall, and I'm here to show you 10 films that turn one single room into a nightmare. Let's get into it. Number 10, 12 Angry Men, 1957. This is the least nightmare film on the list in the horror sense, which is exactly why it matters. The room is not haunted, flooded, or locked from the outside. It becomes unbearable because 12 human beings bring all their prejudice, fear, ego, and impatience into it and then refuse to leave. Henry Fonda's juror number 8 does not win the room through force. He wins it through patience, which is almost more terrifying. The longer the debate goes on, the more the space starts to feel like a sealed pressure chamber where certainty slowly rots under argument. Every vote changes the room's geometry. Every crack in the consensus makes the air feel thinner. What makes the film so enduring is that nothing physically changes, yet everything does. That is the purest form of single-location suspense. The room stays the same, but the people inside it become unrecognizable. By the end, the jury room feels less like a civic space and more like a moral furnace. The film is also quietly savage about how quickly reasonable doubt becomes social friction when the wrong person insists on thinking too long. It is a movie about logic, yes, but also about the social cost of refusing to be rushed. Number 9, Rope, 1948. Hitchcock turns an apartment into a stage for guilt. Two young men murder a classmate, hide the body in a chest in the same room, and then host a dinner party around it like they are trying to audition for the worst homeowners in Manhattan. The genius of Rope is that the room does not need to become physically more dangerous. It only needs to keep existing while more people enter it. Every guest increases the odds of discovery. Every polite conversation becomes a threat. The audience knows the truth, and that knowledge transforms even casual dialogue into a countdown. Hitchcock's long-take style gives the apartment a theatrical continuity that makes the danger feel continuous too. There is no relief cut, no release valve, no visual escape hatch. The room becomes the entire moral universe of the film, and everyone walking through it is one bad sentence away from catastrophe. It is elegant, cruel, and deeply suspenseful in a way that still feels modern. It also has the bizarre confidence of a movie that knows its own premise is so toxic it can survive on pure tension alone. Hitchcock basically dares you to look away, then punishes you for staying. Number 8, Saw, 2004. Saw proved that a single room could launch a franchise and a cultural panic at the same time. The bathroom is filthy, rusted, ugly, and almost aggressively unglamorous, which is why it works. The room is not a gothic set piece. It is a humiliation chamber. Two men wake chained in it with a dead body, a tape recorder, and the distinct sense that somebody has had a very bad day and wants to share. The brilliance of the setup is how fast the room forces a moral posture. Before the characters can even think about escape, they have to decide what kind of people they are willing to become to survive. That choice is what gives the movie its bite. The room is physical, but the real trap is ethical. James Wan understands that the room is doing more than holding bodies. It is staging guilt. That is why the film lands so hard. The space is a trap, but it is also a test, and the test keeps getting meaner. The bathroom became iconic because it distilled an entire horror era into one miserable tile-lined square. It's not a place. It's a threat with plumbing, and the sequels only proved how impossible it is to recreate that first, nasty little lightning strike. Number 7, Gerald's Game, 2017. This is one of the most brutal single-location films because the room is not merely confining. It is emotionally invasive. A remote cabin bedroom becomes a site of trauma, memory, bodily terror, and psychological collapse, all while the protagonist is physically trapped to the bed after her husband dies unexpectedly. Mike Flanagan does not waste the premise. He uses the trapped body as a gateway into everything Jesse has spent years avoiding. The room forces the film to become about survival, yes, but also about regret, shame, memory, and the ugly little corners of the mind that show up only when there is nowhere left to run. That means the threat is never just dehydration or injury. The threat is what happens when a person can no longer distract herself from her own history. Carla Gugino carries the movie almost entirely by herself, and she makes Jesse feel like a person thinking, remembering, panicking, and trying not to split apart in real time. The film keeps finding new forms of danger without changing the location, which is exactly the trick. The room stays the same, but the nightmare keeps mutating inside it. It is one of those rare adaptations that understands the original novel is less about a stunt premise than about survival under psychic pressure. It also has one of the smartest uses of internal monologue in modern horror, because the room is scary, but the mind in the room is scarier. Number 6. The Guilty, 2018. The room in The Guilty is barely a room, a 911-style emergency call center workspace, but the film treats it like a vice tightening around the protagonist's neck. Asghar is stuck at his desk, and the audience is stuck with him as a kidnapping call turns into a crisis that keeps getting worse by the minute. What makes the film so effective is its refusal to cheat the location. Instead of cutting away to action, it keeps folding the outside world into the room through sound, voice, and performance. That creates a uniquely cruel kind of suspense, because the audience knows just enough to panic and not enough to relax. Every new detail is a little more information and a little more danger. It is a movie built out of worsening phone calls, which is maybe the most modern nightmare imaginable. The original Danish version is the one that really understands the form. The more the film stays on Asghar's face, the more the room becomes a pressure point for guilt as much as danger. It feels small in the most dangerous possible way. Every phone call is another shove against the walls. By the end, the room has become a psychological courtroom, and Asghar is both the witness and the defendant. Even the sound design feels cornered, as if the air itself is running out. Number 5. Cube, 1997. Cube is not one room technically. It is a machine made of many rooms, which is even worse. The film's genius is that the spaces are nearly identical, so the terror does not come from what the rooms look like. It comes from the system. Strangers wake up in a maze of deadly cube-shaped chambers with no memory, no context, and no authority figure to appeal to. They have to infer the rules through trial, error, and death, which is a very rude onboarding process. That makes Cube feel less like a conventional escape thriller and more like an existential punishment. The horror is not just that the rooms are dangerous. It is that nobody knows why the maze exists or whether escape means anything. The film is one of the best examples of low-budget ingenuity in cult cinema because it turns repetition into dread instead of boredom. Every new room looks like the last one, which means every new room feels like the universe is mocking them. The most terrifying thing about Cube is how impersonal it is. There is no monster with a face. There is just architecture behaving like a sadist. The rooms are not trying to contain the characters. They are trying to break their brains. And because the movie refuses to give you a clean explanation, the mystery becomes part of the oppression. You do not merely fear the cube, you start to resent it. Number 4. 1408, 2007. 1408 starts as a haunted room story and turns into a psychological assault. John Cusack's Mike Enslin enters the room as a skeptic, which is important because the film needs him to begin from a place of control before the room starts dismantling him. And dismantle him, it does. The room does not merely contain horrors, it generates them. Time bends, memory fractures, grief returns, and the room becomes a personalized hell that keeps changing form just enough to keep the audience off balance. One beat, it is supernatural. The next, it is emotional. The next, it is temporal. The next, it is the protagonist losing his grip on reality. What makes it relentless is that the room traps not just the body, but the mind's ability to trust itself. The film never needs to leave the location because the location itself keeps rewriting the rules of perception. It is the rare haunted room movie that understands the room should not just be cursed, it should be rude. The hotel room becomes a machine for weaponizing unresolved grief, which is why the horror lands even when the ghosts stop being the main event. Cusack helps by playing the role as a man who keeps trying to stay rational while the universe keeps moving the floor. Number 3. Misery, 1990. Misery is the gold standard for domestic captivity turning into psychological torture. The setting begins as a rural bedroom and expands into a whole house, but the emotional effect is larger than the footprint. The room becomes a total system of control. Annie Wilkes does not merely keep Paul Sheldon from leaving. She controls his medication, his schedule, his pain, his manuscript, and the story of his own body. The room is a prison for the body and the mind at the same time, which is why it still feels so unbearable decades later. It is a hostage movie where the hostage also has to keep writing, which adds a beautifully horrible layer of absurdity to the terror. Kathy Bates is the reason. Annie is not a flat monster. She is conversational, funny, wounded, and then suddenly explosive. That volatility keeps the room unstable. The viewer never knows which version of her will walk in next, and the room itself becomes dangerous because the person controlling it is impossible to predict. What makes Misery so effective is that the horror is creative as well as physical. Paul cannot leave, but he also cannot write the book he wants to write without her permission. That is a nightmare with a publisher's deadline, and somehow it is worse. The film understands that the cruelest prisons are the ones where the captive is still expected to perform. It is also one of the rare movies where a broken leg feels like only the beginning of the problem. Number 2. 10. Cloverfield Lane, 2016. This bunker is both shelter and threat, which is the film's whole psychological engine. Michelle wakes after a car crash and is told the world outside is unsafe, but the movie never lets the audience settle into trust, either in the bunker or in the man controlling it. John Goodman is the reason the film works so well. Howard can be charming, paternal, volatile, and terrifying within the same scene. That means every interaction becomes an interpretation problem. Is he a paranoid savior? A kidnapper? Both. The film keeps that uncertainty alive with admirable cruelty. Every friendly gesture has a shadow attached to it, and every threat can be read as either evidence or performance. The bunker itself also deserves credit. It is large enough for movement, which keeps the movie from becoming visually stale, but it is still a closed ecosystem with rules, zones, and emotional fault lines. The fear does not come from being cramped. It comes from not knowing whether the space is protection or a prettier version of imprisonment. That ambiguity is the secret weapon. The room is never just a room. It is an argument the film refuses to settle. What also helps is that the movie understands scale. It gives you enough breathing room to think the worst is past, then reminds you that breathing room can still be part of the trap. It is a bunker movie that keeps changing genre without leaving the bunker. That is very efficient nightmare engineering. Number 1. Buried, 2010. This is the purest nightmare on the list because the location is not just one room. It is a coffin, which means the film converts every basic human need into a countdown. Paul Conroy wakes up buried alive in Iraq with a lighter, a phone, and a rapidly shrinking amount of air. There is almost no visual variation, almost no physical freedom, and almost no possibility of rescue that depends on him. That is what makes the film devastating. The drama comes from communication, memory, and the slow realization that control has already left the room. The film refuses to cheat the premise. The camera stays with Paul almost exclusively, and the audience learns about the hostage situation, ransom demands, and workplace betrayal at the same time he does. That creates total identification with a man who cannot stand, cannot turn around, and cannot escape, because the room is already doing the one thing rooms are not supposed to do. Ryan Reynolds is crucial here. He was still mostly associated with snarky comedy at the time, and the film uses none of that persona. He plays exhaustion, panic, bargaining, and denial with complete seriousness, which makes the whole thing work. The tension comes not from jump scares, but from watching a man ration oxygen and hope in the same breath. Conceptually, it is almost impossible to beat. One location, one character for most of the runtime, one escalating problem, no relief valve. It is not just claustrophobic, it is existential, and it is the rare film that takes a high-concept gimmick and wrings it so dry that it stops feeling like a concept and starts feeling like a condition. By the end, you do not think, that was a clever premise. You think, I need fresh air and possibly therapy. The best single-location films do not feel limited. They feel like the room has become the whole world. They strip away geography, spectacle, and escape, until what is left is pressure, personality, and the ugly truth about what people do when they cannot leave. That is why the subgenre works so well. It gives you one place, and then makes that place mean everything. Every film here turns its room into a machine for dread. Some do it with ghosts, some with guilt, some with pure geometry, but the result is the same. Once the door closes, the nightmare begins. If you want, I can now turn this into a cleaner final performance script with smoother pacing, stronger punchlines, and tighter transitions between entries.